Hey everyone, and welcome to my review of Monster Hunter Stories 2: Wings of Ruin. In my reviews, I always try to give you all the information you need, plus a bit of my personal opinion, with as little fluff as possible. So, as usual, I'm going to start off by giving you the facts about the game so you know what type of game it is, and then we'll move into personal opinion territory where I'll talk about the stuff I liked and the stuff I didn't like. After that, we'll end the review with a conclusion and a recommendation. And remember, if you like this review or find it useful, please do consider subscribing to the channel. We're currently aiming to get to 500 subs, and every single person who hits that little red button really does make a difference. So Monster Hunter Stories 2: Wings of Ruin is the sequel to the 2017 3DS game titled simply Monster Hunter Stories. This new game is available for both Nintendo Switch and PC, but does not follow the events of the first game. So if you're a new player to the series, fear not, you won't need to know anything about the original. At its core, the game is a turn-based JRPG with a lot of crafting and some monster taming as well. The combat, while turn-based, does feature a small amount of QuickTime style button prompts for certain actions. You may need to mash the A button to overpower an enemy monster, for example. It follows a more rock, paper, scissors formula than most turn-based games tend to do, and you only have full control over your character. The monster you bring to the fight along with any human allies basically does what it wants to do most of the time. Most attacks in the game are assigned one of three types: power, technical, or speed. Power beats technical, technical beats speed, and speed beats power. As an example, if you use a speed attack against an enemy who's using a power attack, a head-to-head will occur. At this point, because you were using speed against power, you will win the head-to-head and land the hit on the enemy without them being able to hit you back. The opposite is true if the enemy beats your type, and if you both use the same type, you'll basically crash into each other and both take a reduced damage hit. That is the basics of combat, but there's still a lot more depth in there to be discovered for people that want it. When you kill the various monsters around the world, of which there are a lot, they will not only give you XP to level you and your monsters up, but also drop parts of their bodies, things like scales, horns, or fur, for example. You can then use these to craft loads of armor and weapons themed on the monster whose parts you used. All of the armor and weapons do have different stats and strengths, so there's a lot in the game that you can craft and collect. You'll also be able to acquire monster eggs from monster dens, which you can hatch, raise, and train however you see fit. Some eggs are rarer than others, of course, and some monsters will hatch with better bonus stats. You can find the rarer eggs in rare monster dens that randomly spawn in the semi-open world. The world is split into many different zones, but each area is quite open in nature. It's similar to the way that the Borderlands games structure their world. The game features a character creator, a long story that should last you easily more than 30 hours, and of course a small multiplayer component where you can battle other players or do some limited co-op. And that's really about it for what the game is and what it's all about. So you should at least have some idea of what kind of game this is, and at this point I think it's best to get into the personal opinion stuff and talk about the things I liked. So starting off with the positives, obviously the game is a spin-off of the mainline Monster Hunter series, so saying that the monsters are well designed is probably a bit redundant, maybe, although with the Switch being very underpowered at this point in time, Capcom really did need to change the visual art style for this game because there's just no way they could have rendered the monsters as they appear in Monster Hunter World, for example. It just wasn't going to happen, but I do quite like the cartoony, bright and colourful look that they've gone for. In my opinion, not only does it look good, but it also serves as a way to distinguish this series from the mainline counterpart, and I think that's a very good idea. A spin-off should be able to hold its own and have its own unique identity that sets it apart from its origins. I mean, honestly, everything really does look great and the art direction works perfectly well considering the lighter tone of the game, and of course the more limited hardware that it has to run on. My next point is kind of a small thing, but I appreciate that developers actually had the balls to do something like this in the first place. Monster Hunter is one of those games that attracts a lot of hardcore players, and for good reason. The mainline Monster Hunter games can be quite a hard thing to just dabble in. You're either in or you're out with this series, and in my opinion, after playing Stories 2 a lot, I think that a lot of the mainline players will actually write this game off entirely for, well, not being a Monster Hunter game, at least in the way they would want it to be one. It really is nothing like the standard Monster Hunter games. Okay, yes, you do see some monsters that are the same, in fact a lot of monsters that are the same, and they do try to integrate some of the mechanics from the original series into this game, albeit with differences, but I started to think that, okay, maybe this can be a way that younger players can experience the Monster Hunter series without having to be really good at the standard games. I mean, I've got 300 hours in Monster Hunter World and Iceborne and have beat the game and most of the endgame solo. It can honestly feel like a brutally hard game sometimes, so it's nice to see a more accessible version of the game become available, even if it doesn't play the same at all. I could imagine this being a series that younger players will really get into, see all the monsters, and then maybe as they grow up will move into the mainline Monster Hunter games, and that's only a good thing in my opinion. Something else that I noticed pretty much all the way through the game is that the sounds, music, and animations, especially for the monsters and especially in battle, looked very, very high quality to me. You can definitely tell that a lot of work went into it, and it wasn't just a half-assed cash grab. It was designed and made by people who clearly care about what they're doing, and it shows. This follows through into the designs of the armor and the weapons. Now granted, some do look very familiar, if not the exact same as some of the gear from the mainline games, but having said that, they're still all pretty cool and desirable. And of course, there's obviously going to be other little things here and there that I liked, but instead of wasting your time with the nitty-gritty, I think it's time to move into the negatives. So as I mentioned before in a previous video, both me and my wife bought this game, 2 separate copies of the game and 2 different Switch consoles. I always play my Switch on the TV with a Pro controller, and she always plays in handheld mode as she has a Switch Lite. And it's been a kind of weird experience because we have both been plagued by minor to moderate headaches while playing this game, and I'm not saying it's the game 100% causing it for everyone that plays it or anything like that. I mean, you could play this game for 100 hours and never get any issue whatsoever, and it will depend on, of course, the person who's playing it, but we've both had pretty bad headaches every time we've played it. It could obviously just be a coincidence, but in the time that we took breaks, the headaches just melted away, and then we went back to playing it again and they came back very, very fast. So I'm not really sure what was causing it. But then we both started to talk about it and think about it, and we came to the conclusion that it could have been caused by the fact that the performance on the Switch version is, well, choppy at best, to be completely brutally honest. The game looks fine, don't get me wrong, it's just the technical performance is just, I don't want to say unacceptable, but it's just not good, you know? It struggles hard to stay at 30 FPS and constantly shifts up and down, making the moment-to-moment gameplay feel almost unpleasant to watch and play at times. In battle, it's not really as bad, but when you're just roaming around the semi-open world, I found that the frame rate would tank in places and then would kind of pop right back up and then go down again, and it just constantly shifts and honestly makes me feel kind of unwell playing it. And again, that's probably just a me thing and, you know, would only realistically affect a very small amount of people. But I do think it's worth mentioning, so if you're somebody who's sensitive to that kind of stuff, or perhaps you get motion sickness very, very easily, do keep that in mind and maybe even go for the PC version if possible, because it's capable of handling 4K at 60 FPS pretty easily and steady. And you know, I don't play on PC, never really have, so it wasn't an option for me. But if you're interested and have the means, then I do kind of hate to say it as this is a console channel, but I would opt for the PC version just based on performance. Another negative point, at least in my mind, was something I just randomly noticed at around 20 hours played, I think. The game is basically exactly the same from the moment you start to the moment you end, and of course a lot of games are, right? But nothing ever really changes or feels interesting after the first few hours, and again, that's just how I felt. But getting to the end felt like a real slog. And sometimes I think you just need to be mentally ready to put in the hours and the effort for a long game like this, and maybe I wasn't, maybe that's what it was, I don't know. But again, you may instantly get addicted to the game and smash out 100 hours with absolutely no problem. This is just how I felt. As an example, I told my wife about that and she could understand what I was saying and sort of felt the same way, but said she didn't really generally feel that way herself yet. So I mean, there you go, there's 2 people that know each other very well playing the same game, and we've both got a slightly differing opinion on how it felt to us. And as I said, a lot of games are the same from the beginning to the end. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Dynasty Warriors games, and they are some of the most repetitive things on the planet, you know? I think the issue is that sometimes, for whatever reason it is, and sometimes that reason is unbeknownst to even yourself, certain games just don't grab you the way you think they might. And it's often really hard to explain why that is. And with what I just said in mind, this one is definitely a person-by-person thing. But I honestly didn't really care for the story at all. I mean, the voice acting was good and the cutscenes are actually really good, but the narrative, just the way it was structured, just didn't grab me, as I said before. I'm also not going to show any of it or spoil any of it for people who might enjoy it, but yeah, I'm just not really sure why. It just didn't interest me at all in any way, and believe me, I really did try. When I played the demo, I found that the story was actually quite interesting and I wanted to know more, but again, 15 hours in, I just lost interest in it. And you know, it's a very strange thing because sometimes that kind of thing will just happen for no reason whatsoever. And I can't be the only one who was looking forward to diving into a story or a game only to have the realization that you just kind of don't care about it. And if that's happened to you, you know, be sure to let me know in the comments. And the last negative that I really want to talk about is that a lot of stuff that you can craft in the game feels kind of pointless to me, and so do a lot of the monsters. The gear looks really cool and the monsters you get parts from are fun to fight, don't get me wrong, but very quickly you'll be throwing your armor and weapons aside for the ones with the best stats. You do unlock the ability to add a layer, which is this game's kind of transmog system, but even then, there'll just be so many pieces of gear that you never need to make or acquire because the other stuff is just flat out better. And I was thinking about it compared to the mainline Monster Hunter games, and I guess the gear in that felt far more earned. Each time you got the parts off of a monster, it felt like you'd gone through a big epic battle, which you had, in order to get these parts and create these different pieces of gear. But of course it's probably a little bit unfair to compare the two, considering they are completely different styles of games. In much the same way, I basically took most of the monsters I had from the starting area through to the end. I mean, yeah, I did get some eggs and hatch others and do all that stuff, but you never really need new ones. I mean, of course you can, it's there if you want them, but the monster dens where you get the eggs are all very samey and kinda dull to go through over and over again. And once you've done it, 50, 75, 100 times, it just kind of gets dull and boring to search for these eggs, and eventually I just stopped doing it and used the monsters that I already owned. And again, there's probably a few more minor things here and there that I dislike, but I think it's about time for the conclusion. So then, from those negatives, you might think that I dislike the game and wouldn't recommend it. Actually, no. I honestly think it's a fine game and I think a lot of people will enjoy it, probably more than I did. On this channel, I try to actively cut through my own opinions and bias and think about the wider world when I review a game. While I was a bit disappointed by the game overall, I think that the majority of players out there will actually enjoy it. I did a video on the demo, and when I played that, I actually had this feeling that I hadn't felt since the early days of Pokemon. I owned Pokemon Red in the UK before it was officially released. We actually had an import store where I lived, and they had an imported copy from the US, which came out I think around a year before the EU version did. So I was there from the start. I was there when the Gotta Catch 'em All craze really started. And the demo for Monster Hunter Stories 2 kind of gave me that addictive feeling of wanting to catch them all, or in this case hatch them all. But when I played the full release, that bubble just burst really, really quickly, and it was just due to how mundane the game felt overall. Nothing felt exciting at any point. But of course that's only a personal view and your mileage may vary. But I think if you're a Monster Hunter fan and you play the mainline games a lot, this honestly might not be for you. It really is nothing like them, and for me it didn't have any of the excitement either. On the other hand, if you've never played any Monster Hunter games at all before and don't fancy the more difficult mainline games, then I think this could be worth a try for you, but keep the performance issues in mind. And finally, if you're someone who just, gobbles up every JRPG on the market and absolutely loves the genre, then yeah, I definitely recommend this to someone like that. It's got more than enough going for it if you like to grind stuff out, constantly min-max everything, and go for the biggest bosses in the game, do everything that you can possibly do. I think you'll easily get your money's worth out of this game. And if you're still not sure what to do after watching this review, there is a demo out for it, so please do go give it a try if you're at all interested in it. I think it's worth a shot. So there you go, that's my honest review of Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin. Sadly, it didn't quite do it for me. It didn't live up to my own personal expectations and slowly became stale over time, but I think overall I can see the quality of the game shining through that, and it's easy to recommend to any JRPG fan. If any of you want to chat about the game or have any questions about it, please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you found the video helpful, a thumbs up would be appreciated, and if you want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Remember to check out Pyro Games, there'll be a direct link to their store in the video description down below, along with a 10% discount code. But with all that said, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.